We've all heard about growth through acquisition, but what does it mean? And how do you know if you're ready for it? We're going to learn about it today. Welcome to the KeyHire Small Business Podcast, where we cover the issues that help owners scale their small business. I'm Corey Harlock, creator of KeyHire Solutions, and I'm going to be your host. Our guest today is Justin Abrams. He's the founder and CEO of Aryo Consulting Group, which he built to give small business founders what the big guys get: real strategy, zero fluff, and help that actually drives growth. A couple interesting notes about Justin. He is based in Boston sports fan, tough time to be a Boston sports fan. He's consulted for over 350 clients in the past 5 years. And he actually got his start during COVID through Upwork, which is, maybe we'll get him to give us a little background on that story when he starts. It's a kind of cool story. Matt, let's bring Justin to the show. Welcome, sir.
Corey, thank you for having me.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Awesome. How's the weather up in Boston?
It is dreary, classic Boston day. So, I mean, anything we can get that's not snow, but it's May. So, it's not so bad.
Cool. Are you born and raised?
Born and raised. I went to Chicago for a couple of years, and then I went to New Haven for like a year, but pretty much 30 years in Boston area.
Is the New Haven pizza as good as they say?
It's great, but some of the popular spots I feel like are a little overrated. There's a lot of other smaller, like mom and pop shops that don't get the recognition they deserve.
Cool, because everyone follows the Dave Portnoy app, right? The One Bite or whatever. So we flew through New York, and we had like a 5-hour layover. So I took my kids, and we hit 2 of his top-rated places in NYC. We did John's.
How do they rate?
We did John's off Bleecker. It was good, and then we did another one, and we were like, no, this isn't that great. So I don't know. Anyway,
could have been a bad day too.
Yeah, maybe it was, but that's the whole thing, right? Like, they weren't crispy, they weren't that hot. It felt like they sat under the heat lamp for a bit, or whatever. Anyway, hey, so we are talking today about how do you know when it's the right time or a good time to grow through acquisitions. We always like to start with some definitions. So when we talk about acquisition, what are some of the terms that we should know or we should definitely keep in mind?
Yeah, so acquisition itself is kind of a scary word. Like, everyone's heard of these, like, merger. Oh, I work in mergers and acquisitions, law or due diligence, right? M&A. That in itself is, it's just like an unnecessary word. It just really means buying a business. If you said I was going to M&A a home, like you would sound crazy. But for whatever reason, like, we have this fancy terminology for acquisition that is, rather unnecessary. So it really is just buying a business. And then the next thing is really about, so people will often talk about multiples. That's like kind of a common terminology. Yeah. So you have, what they're usually talking about is multiples off of the EBITDA, which is another terminology that kind of scares people. You could pretty much think about EBITDA as just profit. Again, like, profit, not a scary word. EBITDA, scary for whatever reason.
What the hell is it stand for, right? You always try to recite the letters.
So if you had a $1 million business revenue-wise, and you had a, let's just say 10% profit, oftentimes, so you would say, it's a, let's just say if you wanted to buy the business for $500,000, it would be a 5x multiple on that business, right? So 5 times the 100,000. And that's really, those are some of the most, like, those will scare 80% of the people away.
Right. Well, there's also like a platform company or bolt-on company or all these different nuanced terms that mean the same but different things, depending on how you're using them.
Yeah, and I find that most people, I think they get bogged down by this. Again, like, you can kind of think about a business, and another word that I think a lot of people aren't as scared of is like vertical integration. They understand that if you're a flower shop or a florist, you have to buy the flowers from, let's say, a farm. And so that in itself isn't so scary. But when you think of like bolt-on or platform, it's like it starts to get like more, it just gives a lot of people anxiety. And so they typically don't even look into this strategy.
Right. And I guess once you start involving agents and brokers and banks and things like that, these are going to get thrown around a lot more. But in the end of the day, I think you kind of have to have someone on your team who knows that landscape.
Yeah, in some ways, it's very similar to real estate, where you could go about it yourself. You could certainly do that. The problem is that there's a lot of these terminologies and there's a lot of just best practices that, and even many of the people that I speak to who have been running businesses for 20 plus years, they haven't ever touched this area. And so
Right.
they're for whatever reason, they're extremely brazen in their business risk wise, but as soon as you go into acquisition, they get scared.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, and then it's a putting the deal together. It's not just often a purchase.
Right.
It could be an asset purchase, but if you're buying a business with a leader, right, you might have another fancy term, an earn out. You might have all kinds of stuff going on. So let's roll through this. So we're talking about the benefits of growing through acquisition. So when it comes to, I guess, in the context of I got a company, we're growing, we're cash flowing, and I'm thinking I could build a new plant, or I could buy someone else's maybe to add capacity. Maybe I'm stealing your thunder. So maybe there's a few instances you can think of where growing through acquisition would be ideal or something to consider.
So there's a number of reasons why, but I think the core concept of growing through acquisition should be compared to just simply marketing through client growth, right? So if everyone is very aware, like if they're doing $1 million a year and it's the end of the year and they're trying to get to $2 million a year, there's only a few methods for getting there, right? You can really double down on your sales and hire a crack sales team and start dialing and meeting and shaking hands. You can go to events, you can run ads depending on your industry. Like obviously everyone is familiar with Google and Meta. However, like when we think about the actual growth, like from a pure return on investment, growth or acquisition is the most effective at growing your business. The reason I say this is there is no scenario where you could use a small amount of money and double or triple the size of your customer base and ensure that these are customers who are loyal to that other company and are, relatively okay with staying on. If you're a dentist, for example, you have a list of maybe 1,000 patients. If Corey is willing to sell, Corey's dental practice to me, assuming that I'm not like a bad Dr. Kevorkian, like horrible person of the world, like they'll probably stay on for the next year. People aren't churning from a dental practice every year. And
Right.
So instead of the alternative would be, I have to market myself and find a way to capture 1,000 patients who are already relatively satisfied. Like, I don't think people are just changing their dentist every single year. So the only way to really acquire them through marketing is if they're new to the area, or maybe they have a child, or they are truly unhappy. But that's a relatively small group. So this is a much faster way to really scale up. And unlike marketing, where you have to test out the leads and you have to make sure like they're in the right channel and you have to spend, and maybe it's not the right marketing agency that you're using, this is a surefire way. Let me pause. It's not necessarily a surefire way, but it's almost a surefire way of growing your sales at a much faster rate with much more likelihood for bad churn.
Okay, so and that makes sense. The other side of that equation is you can market and get those 1,000 new clients, but can you accommodate them?
Exactly.
You're in a facility, can you handle that much of an increase in production? Or if you're in a professional service or dentist or doctor or whatever it is, how many, maybe to do that much more business, you would need to buy more office space and build it out. And that takes time and that takes money, and buy the equipment and all those other things. And this is buying a fully operational, functional facility, you would hope. So I think that's probably where we get into the mistakes, which is next on the list. So you made this sound amazing, right? Oh, growth through acquisition. That's the way to go. I'm going to double my business by making this acquisition. What are the pitfalls or mistakes you've seen people make when they try to do this?
Oh, there's plenty of pitfalls. This isn't a perfect solution. If it was, everyone would do it. I will say that, so there's a number of issues, but I will say, like, the biggest hurdle is people are just not really familiar with it. They don't really understand it. And so that does give a lot of hesitancy. Now, there's a ton of risks, right? If, for example, I'm going to use the example of a dental office, perhaps Corey selling his business has some skeletons in the closet, and you have to do due diligence to find that stuff out, but it can be hard, and he's going to do his darndest to make sure that you don't know about it.
I saw him walking around in the background too. He was looking for trouble. He was hovering like a shark, getting ready to go.
So my dogs can actually open the door, so I have to always remember to lock it.
I saw him walking around in the background. I was waiting to see what he was going to do.
All right. So, remind me of the question again.
You were talking about people trying to hide the skeletons in their closet.
Yes. So there's a ton of issues with buying a business. The first is obvious, that you don't know exactly what you're buying. So if you were to go and have a home that you're looking to buy, oftentimes you do an inspection. This would be, some form of due diligence, but it's a little bit easier to see like what's on the inside of a home. Then there's often some skeletons in a business, and those can be concerning. And so you have to be very somewhat pragmatic, but also a little bit conservative on your purchase price based off of some of that stuff.
Right. And I can imagine, in small business world, we're talking business owners, $25 million. Maybe I'm a manufacturer or something. And my competition, I know the guy, he's a good guy. He wants to retire, so I'm going to buy his business. And I think some of the mistakes can be made in the diligence side and not knowing what to look for. One of the big ones I'm aware of is if that business, if the best salesperson is the owner and the owner is the business, buying that business and not having the owner be a part of it might not be you might not get the value out of that you're hoping for, because if the owner leaves, maybe half the clients are like, well, if Justin's not there anymore, the only reason I stayed there, and he walks out the door, now you have your client base who's shopping. At least you get first crack at them. But sometimes they don't have any official process and procedure built out. They don't have a database. Like, these are the things that I think of in terms of, really drilling down into what you were just talking about. And maybe that's why it's always smart to involve a professional, because they might know where to find those skeletons.
Certainly true. And what you just explained it's called key man risk. It's like there is this key man or female who is so critical to the business that they themselves hold so much weight. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And you do see this a lot on it's like there's a lot of like one person businesses, like accountants and CPAs are a good example. Our CPA recently retired and there was someone that took over. You can expect there's more churn on that than, say, a dentist, where maybe the dentist is coming in for a minute, but for the most part, it's not that concerning. And they both have degrees, so you don't really change. So that can certainly be an issue. There's a lot of issues. Like there are a number of risks that people have to be aware of. And I think one of the biggest issues is what you just said, right? Key man risk. There are a lot of people that might be tied to this person. So usually, if that's the case, that doesn't necessarily mean you don't want to buy the business, but you want to structure it so that there's some kind of milestone where maybe you take over a third of the business, they have to stay on for 6 months and basically transition the whole team out, all the salespeople and all of the relevant stakeholders and all the clients, and just constantly introduce you and make it so that it's not just like a clean slate. Because in using the home analogy, when you sell your home, you're out. You have 90 days or 30 days.
You don't want the previous owners living with you for 3 months while you transition into your new home.
Exactly.
That'd be weird.
Yes.
So as we go through this, we talked about skeletons in the closet, and I know there could be financial skeletons. People can get very creative with their bookkeeping, and maybe the business isn't doing as well as they're telling you, or they have some excuses why there's the cash flow or there's no cash on hand or whatever it is. Again, another reason to understand that, hey, there are people here who really know this business and they know exactly where to go and what to look for and what those red flags might be.
Yep. There's a ton. Another one I think it's important to mention is staff. Because if you're a totally different personality than I am, and I come in on day one and I'm like, look at all this, we're going to flip it around tomorrow and change everything. Well, you have a lot of people that are working there potentially that they don't need to stay. I mean, in an ideal world, you want almost all of the people to stay and continue on the business. What you're not trying to do is purchase like a distressed asset and just like totally remove everyone. There's a time and a place for that, but for the sake of this argument, like, you're buying a good business at a fair price.
Right.
And you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say another thing is, if it's a family business and the family has all the key leadership or key roles in the business are family members, and the father is tired of it, so he's selling it, and now all of your key leaders are pissed off family members that they didn't get the business or whatever, and they could walk or they could do their darndest to help sabotage you.
Definitely. There's a huge issue with that. There's valuation issues. People are, let's be honest, they're very personal about their business, and
every business owner values their business way higher than the person trying to buy it.
Yes. Yeah. And so on the sell side, when you work with brokers, that is their hardest job, is to try and convince them a lot lower of a multiple. And I know a lot of people have told me, oh, our business is worth, a 10x multiple, because my buddy down the road told me that he got that. And it's just not realistic. I mean, 10x multiple is a very, very high amount. Like, it depends on the industry and whatnot, but I would say in general, and the problem with businesses, it's kind of hard to compare one-to-one, but you could be looking at somewhere between like 2 to 4x your EBITDA or your profits. There are exceptions to that. The larger it gets, the more valuable it gets. So there's not like a perfect fit, but in general, I just speak to someone to try to value it appropriately, or go online and try to get an estimate.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So let's kind of get into, if I'm a business owner and now we've scared them off thinking, geez, there's no way I'm going to go out and acquire a company. This sounds really scary. Let's talk about kind of some best practices or pieces of advice you might be able to give them, Justin, in terms of, okay, growth through acquisition seems like the right thing for us. What are the things they need to be looking at and checking in on and doing to make sure they maximize their probability of getting it right?
So number one, I would really try and focus on who are your competitors in the area, and what is it that they're doing better than you, and can you potentially acquire a business? Either ideally, they would be willing to sell it, but also, are there other companies that are maybe doing it better, or maybe they have a service offering that you don't have but you'd like to expand into?
Okay.
So that's a big potential market. I would also look at, and so this is kind of a separate point, but is the financials, right? So how much are you able to actually spend, put down in both debt, and also go to the bank and get a loan or a line of credit for a purchase? You can do a lot with debt, but you want to be a pretty frugal and fiduciary for the company that you currently have. You don't want to put that in risk. So I think it's there's a few different aspects to kind of start the process. And then honestly, I would just go on a lot of go listen to a lot of podcasts and people in your industry that have done this before, because this strategy, there's a ton of content out there, and a lot of them have been unsuccessful, and people are willing to share their war stories. So it's good to see kind of the pros and cons.
And you brought something up we need to backtrack on. It's being financially ready to make that acquisition, right? You have a business, you've given blood, sweat, and tears to it. You have a team of people that are counting on you, and then you take yourself into the red, trying to acquire a business, and now it's like, we can't afford that, we can't do that. Geez, payroll's going to be tight. I need this cash. And that could affect your decision making going forward, and it could damage both businesses. So I think there's something to be said about just like doing the math and making sure you're not stretching everything so far. I mean, sometimes you swing for the fences and you get a home run, right? But that is not the norm. And I just would hate to think of a business owner who's dedicated their lives to creating a great business, and then they don't do the math on an acquisition, and it puts them in a tough spot.
The biggest problem I see is people doing the math on the yearly financials, but not thinking about the working capital needed throughout each month. And they don't, especially if it's a seasonal business, if it's a landscaper in Boston, let's say. I have clients that are doing this in Boston. The majority of their sales are coming in like, 2 or 3 months of the year.
Right.
And so if you don't have working capital and you're taking on debt, that's a monthly fee that you have to pay. And if you're seasonal business, you might only have 3 or 4 months that really matter. So again, you can look at it from a year perspective and say, all right, we're going to value it at this price because your profit is this, but they don't really think through the actual mechanics of this and having enough reserves.
That's a great point. I mean, a lot of landscapers do snow removal in the winter, and sometimes there's just no snow.
Yep, totally.
And the next year it could be a ton of snow, and then so they do their financials based on a boom year. The next year's a bust year, and now they're really putting themselves in a tough spot.
Definitely.
What other pieces of advice do you have for them, Justin?
Quality of revenue is extremely important. That is a fancy term, I suppose. But if you see $1 million on a P&L for the year, are those people going to come back next year? Are they on a contract? Are they obligated, or at least largely locked in? If this is a one-time fee, I have a client who does windows and doors. People are not buying windows and doors every year.
Correct.
They're coming in once and they're staying that one time, and then maybe in 20 or 30 years they come back.
Correct.
But that's a business that you cannot value in the same way as a dentist or an accountant, where it's recurring every year, and you can trust that quality of revenue to remain the same. In theory, that window and door business is almost worth nothing in some ways, because there is something valuable there, but you're playing a new game every single year, and you're hoping you're going to get lucky.
And the other side of that, I can imagine, is say I have a $10 million a year operation, and a huge HOA knocks on my door one year and says, we need you to do all these multi-family units. And then I have a $14 million a year. And so we average that out. And now over 3 years, my annual revenue just went up by $1.5 million a year. but maybe I went 11, 10, 14, and you go $14 million. That's a good business. Well, it'll probably go back to 10 next year, unless they do a really good job at leveraging that HOA agreement and being able to do that. So I have to think that not doing when you talked about the quality of the clients, the customers, but also the earnings year over year, and are there any kind of unicorns in there that may have driven those numbers up? Or maybe it's just the timely that I'm sure someone who's selling goes, we just had a record year, we just landed this contract of our dreams, I've been thinking about selling, my business has never been more valuable, my multiple's got to be huge, look at this annual increase we just had, but is it sustainable?
Yep, definitely. It's like mask sellers in 2020. Like, they did great. If you looked at their growth year over year from 2019 to 2020, you'd think you're buying like the next gold rush. But the reality is things went back to normal. And you see this a lot in, particularly in the South, with like building companies and let's just say HVAC companies.
Right.
A lot of their contracts are new construction, and those last like once every 10 to 15 years. So really break it down. See like what's recurring every month versus new sales, and just again really look into that quality of earnings for the future growth.
So now you got me spinning, because the other thing I think of is exactly that. You talked about that HOA. Maybe they're a preferred vendor with a large home builder in an area, and that large home builder is 90% of their business. Do you look at that and say, oh, that's beautiful? Or do you look at that and go, oh, there's a potential problem there?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that if you can have an actual contract involved and you believe that there's not a key man risk, like maybe the guy's best friends with the guy on the HOA, that could be a little concerning. But if you can largely assure yourself that that's not the case, I do think there's a lot of value. And typically the right way to build out these businesses is taking a more like professional salesperson's approach, making sure that we have contracts for 3 to 5 years so that you don't have to lay off staff the moment that a contract is lost. That's a really hard thing to deal with.
And you brought up, I think that would fall under the skeleton closet when you said the owner of the company is best friends with the guy running the HOA. So he leaves and the guy in the HOA goes, well, I don't need loyalty to these guys. Who else?
Exactly.
Who's my next buddy I can help? Or who, what's in it for me? This guy was taking me hunting 3 times a year, and that's why I gave him all my business.
It all comes full circle. Key man, there's the skeletons, there's financial problems. They all kind of relate together, but they have their own distinct like specifics.
So I don't know how the right way to say this, but sometimes it sounds like we have some unsophisticated people trying to do a very sophisticated deal.
Yes.
And that's why, and when I mean unsophisticated, I mean in the world of acquisition, because it is a very niche, and people are good at identifying good companies because they know the industry and they're really good at what they do. It's one of those things where you think, well, I'll just do it myself. And if you've never done it, you don't know where to look and what's true and what's not, and what's a red flag and what's a green flag. And that's why it's worthwhile, if you're going to invest this kind of money, to have someone involved. I mean, you hear of deals all the time. Well, my buddy, he wanted to retire, so I just bought his company. I know him. I know the company. I know the people. We've been working together for years. That stuff kind of makes sense. And I don't know that you need that level of expertise. But if I'm running my HVAC manufacturing and I'm doing $10 million a year, we've done the math, and my facility will max out at $12 million a year, and I want to do $20 million a year. And the quickest, easiest, dirtiest way to get that done is to go buy 1 or 2 mom and pop shops out there that have the facilities I need to create and build more HVAC units. you probably want to get someone who knows what they're looking for to help you out.
Yeah. I think I've spent at least the majority of this podcast saying why you should not go into growth through acquisition. But I should clarify that all of these concerns are also like really positive for why it is good, because a lot of people don't even consider this. And so it's like, if you were competing, I would much rather compete not against LeBron James, but against a bunch of kindergartners. Not to say that that's
you can always compete against Bronny.
Yeah, I would struggle there too. So, the thing is, like, when you do look at the successes are often really, really powerful. And this is exactly the private equity strategy that you're securing is you buy a number of businesses, you make sure that they have good quality, and then you hope that over a 5 to 10 year period, you can 5 to 10x your growth. And that isn't outrageous. But if you were to say, let's do that through marketing, it would be nearly impossible to go from 5 to 50 million that way.
And you bring up a good point. We're trying to highlight the mistakes you can make because it could be a costly mistake. Yep. But if you do it right, I always talk about maximize the probability of getting it right. It could be the best thing you could do as well. So I think we've been harping on the mistakes because I always feel really protective of these business owners. Like, man, I don't want you to not get the information you need or have someone mislead you and your hard-earned dollars go out the door. And then, there's a lot of people counting on you to have a successful business. So that's why we always include the mistakes, right? Because I want them to say, oh, okay, maybe I'm doing that, or I'm going down that road. And I see how that could affect the business and kind of the longevity of the business. But acquisitions is cool. It's a great idea. Just please go about it the right way. Don't try to ad hoc it. That's, I think, my message.
Yep. And I would also really just think about, as a business owner, where are you in your journey and where do you want to go to? Yeah. I think that it's very common for us to think about like a 401k and like a retirement plan if you're a W-2 employee, but very few people are thinking about this is an asset. The business is the asset that you have.
Yep.
And you're going to be selling it, or you're going to be giving it to your children. But we're seeing more and more, particularly restaurants and, physical jobs, people's kids don't want to take that on. And so now you have this asset that you probably weren't really thinking about doing anything with. You were just going through the motions, running the business, dealing with the chaos. Now you have this thing that you need to sell. And there's a lot of catalysts for selling a business, but a lot of them are quite grim, right? You have death, divorce, depression, arguments with the partners, maybe just financial struggles. There's a lot of grim realities to this. And so you want to be sure that, we focused again a lot on the buying side, but there's a lot of reasons why people are just trying to sell their business. And you might also be able to get it in at a good time, have a transition that's fair and normal, and then actually benefit both yourself and the people that are selling it. So it's a good steward of that community as well.
For sure. I totally agree. This has been awesome, Justin. Thank you so much for all the information. If people are listening out there and they're thinking, man, I gotta hit Justin up and pick his brain or maybe help him. I'm thinking about doing an acquisition and I could use his input. How can we get in touch with you?
Yeah, so my website is aryocg.com. You can see it on the bottom left there. We're based in Boston, but we have clients pretty much all throughout the entire world, certainly in the US. Or you can find me on LinkedIn at Justin Abrams.
Very cool. Well, that's awesome. Thanks so much for everything. It's been a good conversation. I've enjoyed it, and I'm sure people will get value out of it.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks, man. There you go, Justin Abrams. I'd like to thank you for tuning into the KeyHire Small Business Podcast. If you got value out of today's episode and you want to keep up to date on our new content, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube station here. Share it with people that if you think they're planning on selling their company and you think this is valuable for them. Leave a comment. Let us know what topics you'd like us to discuss in the future. If you prefer to listen to your podcast, you can find us on Apple, Spotify, whatever major platform you listen on. Just search up the KeyHire Small Business Podcast. I'd like to thank you for listening. I'm Corey Harlock, and until next time, stop grinding, start growing.